Hello everyone, and welcome to our first recording of the semester. We'll have a few more of these, but hopefully not quite set up this way. We'll see how this goes. So, I want to start off with a devotional today, and then we'll get into our lecture. So our devotional is called Embracing Obstacles. And it comes from James 1, verses 2 through 3. It says, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. For years, I viewed health issues, career setbacks, and other difficulties as frustrating interruptions to the life I wanted. Every time I overcame a tough situation, another one sprang up, slowing my progress. However, God helped change my attitude towards such challenges through an unlikely sport, dog agility. For over a decade, I ran alongside Portuguese water dogs through winding courses filled with jumps, tunnels, and other obstacles. In agility competitions, speed is less important than successfully navigating each obstacle. Both in dog agility and in life, I have learned that what is most difficult can prove most important. And thankfully, we do not endure trials alone. Today's reading from James teaches us that perseverance is developed through the testing of our faith during life's trials and is key to making us, quote, mature and complete. It also reminds us that God's guidance is available to all who seek it. Much like my dogs could master difficult agility courses when they sought my direction, I have discovered that I can better handle challenges when I direct my attention towards God. When we keep our focus on God, we can find joy even in life's most unwanted interruptions. Let us pray. Dear God, help us to see our difficult circumstances through your eyes, knowing that our struggles can help us grow to be more like Jesus. Amen. So, I have been struggling to make recordings. I can't tell you how many different things I've tried. It used to be so easy, but it's not anymore. And that's okay. I have learned a lot in my process, and I have tried to be patient. So please be a little patient with me. I'm getting these up as quickly as I can. Do note, when I finish recording all of them, I will put up an extra credit quiz. And that extra credit quiz will be due by next Friday. So I'll be back on Friday. On September 15th, I will be in class, so please be there. And so before class, I want you to have listened to all the recordings and taken the extra credit quiz. And that gives me an idea of what information I need to cover before when we get back to class. So let's go ahead and get started. I went over a little bit of this already. So we talked about plate tectonics. We talked mostly actually about continental drift. So we're going into plate tectonics. And I discussed a little bit about how there's two outer layers to the Earth. We have the lithosphere, which is the outer layer, and then right below that is the asthenosphere. And that outer layer, that lithosphere, is broken up into plates. So these plates, these pieces, are floating around on top of the asthenosphere, which is somewhat molten. It's about 10% of the material is molten material, so it allows those plates to move, to flow over the surface of the Earth. And so these are the general plates that are accepted. Some of these, admittedly, the boundary is a little questionable on them, and there are a lot of minor plates. I want you to know the names of the 7 major plates. So if you have some understanding of continents, you should be able to do this. So our first plate here is the North American plate. And notice our North American plate is over, North America. Underneath that is the South American plate. And here you notice the outline of South America. I want you to know the African plate, and notice here's Africa, and yeah, I know it is partially on the other side over here. I want you to know the Eurasian plate, which is Europe and Asia. So here's parts of Europe over here, And then we get into Asia on this side. Now notice not all of Asia is part of this. We have a little bit that sticks over here on the North American plate, parts of Siberia. And then we also lose India because India is part of this plate. This is the Australian-Indian plate, also sometimes referred to as the Indo-Australian plate. And so we've got India right here, and we have Australia. Now we have another plate that has no continents on it, and that is the Pacific plate in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And we have the Antarctic plate, which is associated with Antarctica. So this gives you an idea of the plates that I want you to know. And these are the only plates that you have to be able to label on a figure. So make sure you know where these are. I want you to also notice the difference between these plates and those described in the theory of continental drift. Here, most of the plates are a mixture of continent and ocean. So if we look, for example, at the South American plate here, we have continent, South America, but we also have this portion of the Atlantic Ocean. And that's very different from what we talked about in continental drift, where the continents were shoving their ways through the ocean. Here, that's not the case, okay? Give me a sec. I've got to go to the next slide. Our next slide here is missing pieces. That's interesting. Okay, so this is the major tenet of plate tectonics, and that is that plates move as a coherent unit. Okay, so they move as a coherent unit. In other words, if you have two people, and I'm just going to draw a little stick people, whoop, 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 and here's another person, whoop, 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 whoop. Okay, and they're on the same continent, on the same plate. Okay, so they're on the same plate. They're going to travel together. Okay, they're both going to travel at the same speed, at the same rate. Now, if I have two plates here, and I have one person on each plate. You like my stick figures? They're very cute, aren't they? So this plate could be going in this direction, and this plate could be going in this direction. So people on different plates could be moving in different directions at different rates. Okay? And this sort of makes sense. Think of it as you have people in a boat. Okay? All the people in that boat are going to travel at the same speed in the same direction because they're all in the same boat. But people on different boats, they may not always go in the same speed or the same direction. Okay? Same basic idea. On average, plates move at about 5 centimeters per year. Okay? So that's the average movement. That is roughly the rate at which your fingernail grows. Okay? They're not moving very fast. This is a very slow process. Okay, next slide, which is also blank. This is going to be fun. So most of the interaction occurs along what we call a plate boundary, where two plates are coming together. Here's a plate, here's a plate. So we name these types of plate boundaries. Okay, so our first type is a divergent plate boundary. So here I have two plates next to each other, and they are diverging. So if you think of diverging means that you have things are going away from each other. So I have two plates moving in opposite directions. They're moving apart. And in many cases, as they move apart, new material will come up in between to fill that gap. Okay, because that gap needs to be filled in. Okay, another type of plate boundary is a convergent plate boundary. So here I have two plates converging. Converging means coming together. So here I have two plates coming together. So in some cases that results in the material between them being destroyed. And oftentimes that material is being pushed down into the earth and being basically reabsorbed. In other cases, the two plates ram together and they form mountain chains. My last type of plate boundary is a transform plate boundary. So here I have two plates, and they are just sliding past each other. There's no destruction or creation of land. We'll talk about the fact, though, that you can have a lot of earthquakes here. So I want you to note here, if we look at our plate boundaries, so, and you look at this picture up here, this is the earthquakes around the world. This is between 1973 and 2011. And these are a magnitude 5 or greater, but you can see the outlines of our plates. Look, let me do a different color. It'll stand out better. No, let me erase what I did. Okay, new color. I think blue will turn out okay here. So look, I'm going to outline this plate here. This is the Cocos plate, right here. Here is the Nazca plate. Here's my Caribbean plate. Now this plate doesn't have a very good plate boundary, so I'm just going to draw here for right now. But this is the North American plate. Okay, you sort of see where I'm going here. You can see the outline of the plates. Some of them get a little messy. You can see the general outlines of our plates here. And so where these boundaries occur is where earthquakes tend to occur. And that's sort of what I want you guys to see. So here we're going to start by going into a little more detail about these. We're going to talk about the divergent plate boundaries. And most of the divergent plate boundaries are located along the seafloor. So we're going to focus on these first. And these are oftentimes referred to as spreading centers, because these are centers where things are spreading apart. So here we have two plates moving away from each other. And as they move apart, magma is going to come up and fill in that gap, to fill in the void. The new rock is going to cool and it's going to form new portions of the sea floor. As time continues, this new sea floor is going to be pulled apart and more new magma comes in to fill the void. And so you have this area where you've got this interesting ridge that occurs. There's these mountains on either side, and then they slowly decrease in size. So this whole area, and really this area too, is referred to as an oceanic ridge. And so these are also sometimes referred to as mid-ocean ridges. Oceanic ridges are the longest topographic feature on Earth. It's about 70,000 kilometers in length. And the crest of the ridge, so this little top piece here, see where this piece comes up, is oftentimes about 2 to 3 kilometers above the ocean basins. And the width of these, so how wide this is about 1,000 to 4,000 kilometers. You can also sometimes have this little area here I'm going to clear this for a sec so you can see it a little bit better. So I've been drawing all over it. Okay. You see how this area indents here? This little indentation? This is referred to as a rift valley. And so the rift valley is also, some people will define it as a deep, down faulted structure. And this is a result of tension. So there's tensional forces that are actively pulling the crust apart, and that creates this void, this divot area. Typical rates of seafloor spraying, as I said before, is 5 centimeters per year. There are variations. The Mid-Atlantic Ridge is one of the slower spreading areas. It's only about 2 centimeters per year. But along the East Pacific Rise in the Pacific Ocean, it can exceed 15 centimeters per year. So there is a lot of variability between different oceanic ridges. So a lot of people wonder, why is it when you look at this topography, you see that this is really high here and then it sinks over time. So why is this really high, and then if this is growing and this is moving out, why isn't this staying high? Well, the newly created oceanic crust is hot, and so it's less dense. Less dense material is going to be a little more buoyant. It's not going to push down on the asthenosphere as much, so it's higher up. As it moves away from the spraying center, it starts to cool, and everything contracts together, so it tightens, and that also increases its density, so it starts to sink in more. By the time the crust has stabilized, it's also buried by substantial amounts of sediment, which is heavy, which pushes it further into the asthenosphere, that semi-molten layer below it. Cooling also strengthens the material below it. So some of this semi-molten material down here hardens. So notice that this gets thicker over time. So you have sediments that are coming in here, but you're also having some of this bottom area or the top area of the asthenosphere hardens and becomes part of the lithosphere. Because in reality, the material in the lithosphere and the asthenosphere, it's exactly the same. It's just whether or not it's solid or semi-liquid. That's really it. I would ask for questions, but you guys can't ask questions this way. So occasionally, this is another type of a divergent boundary. And this is referred to as continental rift, so a rifting. So this is where a divergent plate boundary forms within a continent. And what it does is it causes it to split into 2 or more smaller fragments. So what we have here is through Africa. There is a split that is running right through here like this. And these are actively moving apart. So there's stages that are involved in this. Pull up my slide. So there are stages that are involved in continental rifting. We have stage 1 here, where we have this mantle upwelling. So this is our mantle upwelling. And it causes what we call upwarping. Notice that this is a little bit higher. Not a lot, but there's a little bit higher. The lithosphere becomes a little stretched and a little brittle and can start to break into pieces. And then over time, you can start to get the potential of these little volcanoes that start to form here. In stage 2, now this area is slightly raised, but you have what is referred to as a rift valley. So this down-faulted structure, like we saw in the mid-ocean ridges. And so this area here is all new material that is being created. And we have these volcanoes. And so the East African Rift Valley is in this particular stage. And so it has a couple of volcanoes. There's Mount Kilimanjaro, and Mount Kenya. Now, if this continues to spread, this downfaulted area is going to start to fill with water, and you get what is referred to as a linear sea. And so a modern example of this is the Red Sea. You could actually stick the Persian Gulf in here as well. And so if the Red Sea or the Persian Gulf continues to have the spreading occur, you get a actual ridge, an oceanic ridge form in the center. And at that point, now you have an ocean. Okay, so let's look at another example here. Not all continental rifts will continue all the way through the ocean stage. So, for example, this is a structure that occurs in the Midwest, and it went all the way to stage 2 because there is evidence of downfaulting, so the Rift Valley, and potentially volcanic activity that occurs in this particular arena, but it's no longer active, and so that rifting stopped. So we'll have to see if the East African Rift continues and splits Africa apart, or if it stops, and we have no idea. We cannot predict that at this point. Okay, so we are done with our divergent boundaries. We're going to talk about convergent boundaries, and they're actually so we just discussed the fact that new oceanic crust is constantly being formed, but the Earth isn't getting any bigger, so the only way that can happen is if we're destroying material at the same rate. And so convergent boundaries are also sometimes referred to as subduction zones. Because in many cases where convergence occurs, lithosphere is being subducted. And when I say subducted, I mean it's being pulled into the mantle. And this occurs because the density of this particular plate, the one that is being subducted, that is descending, is greater than the density of the underlying asthenosphere. In general, oceanic lithosphere is actually denser than a asthenosphere, but the continental lithosphere is lighter and more buoyant, so it never gets subducted. So notice is not subducted, and these are not subducted. There are 3 different types, and so we're going to talk about each one of these in just a moment. So here's our first type. This is oceanic continental convergence. Some of these pieces will be repeated for oceanic convergence, so you're going to see similarities and differences. So here I would normally ask, which plate is going to be subducted? And I would hear nothing sometimes. But if you look here, the subducting plate, it says right here, oceanic lithosphere. I want you to notice that this is relatively thin. Okay, this isn't a very thick piece. This is a thick piece right here. This is the continental. Remember, continental resists being subducted, so it's not going to be destroyed. Now, as this crust is being destroyed, eventually it reaches approximately 100 kilometers, and you start to notice this here. I'm going to change my colors here so I can make this fun. Ooh, okay. You see this? This is our melting, and this is referred to as partial melting. So this is triggered. Okay, let me go back a second. So typically, material should not be melted at this depth. It's not hot enough to have melting occur. But wet rock melts at a lower temperature than a dry rock. And this is oceanic material, so it only makes sense as it's being subducted. The little bit of water makes it down with it as well. So we have this wet rock at depth. Being wet, it will start to melt a little bit. Now, I say a little bit, it's only about 10% of it becomes molten material. The rest of it continues on down. And molten material, if you'll remember, is less dense, so it starts to rise up to the surface. So some of it will harden at depth. See, this piece hardened, but some of it will make it up to the surface, and that's where you have volcanoes. So you end up with what is referred to as a continental volcanic arc. Okay, so this is a very key piece that you're going to see. So an example here, you can do the Andes. This example here is the Cascade Range. It runs all the way from California and up into Canada. And so that means that there is a subduction zone right off of here. And so you have this series of volcanoes here. You also have with your continental, your oceanic continental convergence. I had to think about that for a sec. You also have a trench. That's where the two plates meet. It's a little bit lower. And so you have this deep ocean trench. So these are, here we have a trench here, the Peru-Chile Trench, and notice I have a chain of mountains and volcanoes here. This is the Central American Trench, and you have these volcanoes and mountains here. They don't show the one here, but there's one here for the Cascade Range. These over here are a little bit different. We'll go over them in just a moment. So we have our oceanic convergence here. So notice these plates are not very thick. So this is oceanic and oceanic. Notice some similarities here. We still have subduction taking place. We still have our partial melting. And this partial melting leads to volcanoes. But these volcanoes aren't on land anymore. So I can't call it a continental volcanic arc. Instead, it is a volcanic island arc. Also note where these two plates come together, there is a divot here. So I have a trench that is associated with this. So I want to talk a little bit about this volcanic island arc. Volcanoes can form on the seafloor, and if the volcanic activity persists long enough, they will rise above sea level and form an island. These islands tend to be spaced at somewhat regular intervals, about 80 kilometers, and they're generally between 100 and 300 kilometers from the trench itself. So let's look at some examples here. So here I have the Tonga Trench and the Tonga Islands that are associated with it. This is the Kermadec Trench, and there's the Kermadec Islands associated with this. The Mariana Trench, which forms Marianas Islands. The Bougainville Trench, which also has the Bougainville Islands. The Java Sunda Trench. So this is Java, which is a very, very large island, obviously. And the Philippine Trench, same idea. The Japan Trench. So we have Japan here and a bunch of islands that are associated with it. The Kuril Trench, which also has a lot of volcanoes associated with it, and the Aleutian Trench, which has the Aleutian Islands with it. There are only two in the Pacific. We have the South Sandwich Trench, which is associated with the South Sandwich Islands, and the Puerto Rico Trench, which forms some of the islands in the Caribbean, including Puerto Rico, although most of those volcanoes are no longer active. So Mount Pelee and Montserrat are two examples here. Oh, I forgot to update this one, but this was actually from last year. I apologize, guys. But this is looking at, so here we've got a trench right here and a plate boundary. And you notice these are the volcanoes that had occurred in the last 7 days that were larger than a 4.5 from whenever I taught this last time. And so just giving you an idea of the earthquake activity that occurs nearby. Some of these are a little off, like this one. There is an explanation for that, which I will go over when we talk about earthquakes. And so here you can actually see, this is an image where you can really see the trench here. And here's all the islands that are associated with it. Okay. Oh, I did put that in here. Okay, I didn't realize I had. So there's also a lot of faults where there are some cracks in plates. And so you can see these are earthquakes in Alaska. And you can see a lot of them are associated with these various faults. That's what the red lines are faults. Okay, so our last type of convergent plate boundary is the continental convergence. And this is very different from the others because here, notice I have very thick material that is colliding together. There could be some oceanic material associated with this, and that oceanic material will be subducted, but the continental portion, this here, is not going anywhere. Okay? So if I have two plates coming together and neither one wants to be subducted, those two plates are just going to pile up on top of each other and get bigger and bigger and bigger. So you end up with mountains. So if we look at our map here, convergent plate boundaries are designated by these, by this symbol here. So it's a line and triangles. And these triangles indicate the direction. Actually, hold on a minute. That wasn't what I wanted, but it's okay. I will fix this. So the triangles indicate that this plate over here is subducted. And it goes underneath this plate. So it's sort of showing that this is going underneath here. So if we look at this map and we look for triangles, this is oceanic material, this is oceanic, 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 oceanic. Oh, wait, look, continent, continent. So this is where you would expect to find mountains, Himalayas. And then you also find them, you can't see it as well, but right along here. You find a lot of them right here. Okay. So, moving on. Here is a picture of the Himalayas, and there are lots of deformed sedimentary rocks and metamorphic rocks that are found in these mountains, and they also contain some oceanic crust as well as oceanic sediments, and we even find seashells on top of the Himalayas. But the Alps are an example, the Appalachians, the Urals, those are older examples. And so it's believed that India and Asia actually had an ocean between them at one point before they collided. And the reason that they think that is there is evidence of some volcanic activity that occurred here. So if you have a line of volcanic activity on land, that suggests that there was once a trench out here. And so this was a continental volcanic arc, and you would have an ocean there. Eventually that ocean disappeared. It was completely subducted under, and India collided with the Eurasian plate. Okay. So I would normally ask for questions again, but we can't really do that here. So we're going to talk a little bit about transform plate boundaries. Here you have, remember, we've got two plates, and they're just sliding past each other. There's no production of material, there's no destruction of material. So let's look at an example here. Most are found actually on the ocean floor, and they offset segments of the oceanic ridge. So if we look at this particular image here, I'm going to do different colors for my different things here. So I'm going to do red for my oceanic ridge. So here's oceanic ridge here. So this is areas of divergence where things are moving apart. Oops, wrong direction. And then I'm going to do blue for my transform fault. So it connects these two together. Okay, so I'm going to come over here. Here's another one. So if we look at the direction that things are moving, notice I have an arrow going in this direction. Sorry, that wasn't right. Let me erase. That arrow doesn't make any sense. They messed up on the arrow. Okay. So I have a plate going in this direction and this direction. Here I have a plate going in this direction and this direction. So see how they're going in opposite directions of each other. So the reason for these offsets is it allows the ridge system to create linear material in relatively the same speed along this long line, the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, and actually cover a round object. So there's lots of discussion about how to use these terms. I'm going to teach you more the classical way because that's the way I learned. So look instead at the image over here. Okay, so the red here is our ridge axis. This is the transform fault right here. This is the active portion where things are moving in opposite directions. But on the other side of that, things are moving in the same direction. So I'm going to make this green. So this plate is going in this direction. This plate is going in this direction. I want green here. So my plate, this portion here, is called a fracture zone. Okay, so here in this piece, my plates are going in the same direction, same rate, because it's all part of the same ridge axis. So this is my fracture zone. They're no longer going in opposite directions. So this is an alternative way, which I don't like as much, is referring to the whole thing as a fracture zone. Okay, so from here to here, this is all a fracture zone. My problem with this is the fact that technically a fracture zone, things are no longer moving in different directions. That's the inactive portion. So I don't like that usage. So I want you to make sure you understand which part is a transform fault, this piece here, and which part is a fracture zone, this piece here and this piece here. Okay? Now, we don't see these fracture zones anymore because of the fact that material builds up on top of it. And so you don't see that. But they still exist. They're like scars. They're always there. They never completely go away. And along these lines, you can have earthquake activity over time. So it's been a big thing to try and map out where these exist. Now, some of these transform faults do occur on land and not in the ocean. And so one of the biggest and best known of them is the San Andreas Fault, which is right here. So this is in California, and here the Pacific Plate is moving in this direction, and the North American Plate is moving in this direction. So they're moving in opposite directions of each other. And so if this continues, then this whole portion of land here is no longer going to be connected, and it will drift off here. It'll be off the coast of California, Oregon. And when I first heard this as a kid, I thought it was going to happen, any day now. This is going to take hundreds of thousands of years, so please don't anticipate in your lifetime, okay? And so this is the San Andreas Fault. You can actually see it. People have been trying to build there. I think it's a little bit crazy. But there's a lot of earthquake activity along these transform faults that occur on land. This is another example here. This is the Alpine Fault. It goes through parts of New Zealand. So this is New Zealand here, and this is what it actually looks like. And there's also a lot of earthquake activity here as well. So I'm going to wrap it up just coming over here really fast. Here is just a quick map, and I just want you to see here, along here, you have two plates moving away from each other. If I have two plates moving away from each other, this is a divergent plate boundary. This symbol I talked about before, I got two plates moving towards each other. This is a convergent plate boundary. And here I have little arrows that are indicating that this is going here and this is going here. And so here I have two plates that are sliding past each other. So this is a transform fault, okay? So that wraps up all I'm going to talk about in this particular lecture. My next lecture will be support for the theory of plate tectonics, a little bit of how it works, and we'll talk a bit about the layers of the Earth, and then I'll do my third one on earthquakes. So have a good day, guys, and I will do another one soon. Bye.